In today's Farm Report, meat prices are going to be interesting this year. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture shares the details on where poultry, beef, and pork stand.
Hey consumers, you and me, we sure paid a lot for our meats last year. As USDA economist Michael Jewison noted at this year's Agricultural Outlook Forum,
beef is priced high relative to other meats, with that price premium increasing in 2014 with record beef prices. Pork prices were also high in 2014 and certainly expensive relative to history.
And the trend of higher beef and pork prices last year, especially in context of what we receive on average for hourly wages, shows beef and pork prices on a steady trend up since 1988. Meanwhile,
in contrast, chicken prices have declined as a proportion to average hourly wages. Eggs have also remained a relatively affordable protein source.
And Jewison says a look at per capita consumption shows over the last 2 decades, we have been eating more chicken and eggs to get our protein, while eating less beef and pork over that same time period.
He or she faced record nominal retail prices for most meat products during 2014.
So what does 2015 look like as far as how much meat we will eat?
We are forecasting a 5% increase in per capita pork disappearance with greater supplies and lower prices. Beef is expected to be down marginally as supplies remain tight, while chicken is up 4% to 87 pounds per capita. So when we put all the red meat and poultry disappearance together, we could see our forecast for a 3% increase in per capita disappearance, the largest year-over-year percentage increase since 2002.
Jewison says the forecasted rise in meat consumption this year happens to coincide with stronger demand by us consumers, as we see an increase in consumer confidence.
The Restaurant Performance Index for December was at its highest level since December of 2004. And, importantly, consumer confidence for the income group making less than $50,000 has reached the highest level since December of 2007. And this is a positive for meat demand in the United States.
Even with this increase in our demand for meat, we as consumers may also benefit by seeing lower prices. According to Jewison, in this year's USDA Livestock Outlook, the prices received by meat producers, for the most part, will be lower than 2014. One exception is in the beef sector.
We expect cattle to be higher from 2014's record on continued tight supplies of fed cattle. In contrast, hogs, broilers, turkeys, and eggs are all expected to decline from 2014 on greater production.
The translation for the consumer, you and I, we are expected to again pay more for beef this year, while we pay less for both pork and broiler meat in 2015. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Pretty much unanimous praise from the farmers testifying before the Senate Ag Committee Tuesday. Praise for how things went at their local farms agency office when those farmers came to reallocate their base acres, update their yield histories, or sign up for the various Farm Bill programs.
The process went extremely smoothly for us.
They definitely got the sense that they're there to help solve problems and answer questions.
I think it's going a lot better than I thought it would. I'm fairly pleased.
The personnel seemed like they were very much up to speed, very helpful.
Those are 4 farmers who have gone through at least one of the new Farm Bill processes. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack gave the committee an update on national numbers, and he said as of last Friday,
902,866 farms have exercised the right to amend their yields and to reallocate base acres. Over 430,000 producers have already made the election between ARC and PLC.
The deadline, at least right now, for allocating base acres and updating yield histories, this Friday. The deadline for choosing either the price loss coverage or ag risk coverage programs, the end of March. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Farmers may find themselves having to tighten their belts this year as grain prices remain lowered, at least according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who reported on that data at their Agricultural Outlook Forum. Gary Crawford with the USDA has more.
With current lower grain and soybean prices, producers this spring will probably do the logical thing and cut back on acreage. Agriculture Department economist Bill George told the USDA's Outlook Forum the other day.
Overall total area for grains and soybeans is projected to fall about 1% to 245 million acres, the lowest since 2011.
However, the supplies of grains and oilseeds carried over from the huge 2014 crops added to whatever production we get this season will keep total supplies, as Bill George puts it, ample. So much so he's expecting further price declines for this next season.
Ranging from 4% for corn to 15% for wheat. Soybean prices are projected to fall 12%.
Now, for corn, the smaller acreage with so-called normal weather would produce a crop about 4% smaller than last season at 13.6 billion bushels. Bill George says, however, that export demand could rebound somewhat with lower expected corn production in the rest of the world, and the U.S. share of the world corn market might increase. However, the value of all U.S. ag exports this season could fall by $9 billion. All of this, of course, will do a number on the incomes of many U.S. farmers. At the Outlook Forum, we caught up with USDA economist Kevin Patrick, and he gave us the latest forecast.
For net farm income, we have a forecast of a decrease of about 32%, down to $73.6 billion. And for net cash income, we have a forecast down about 21% from 2014.
Quite a cut, and that's mostly going to hit the crop producers. However, even cash receipts for livestock producers are going to fall by almost 5% this year. Patrick says there are some things, of course, that will at least lessen the pain for many crop and livestock producers.
There's going to be a little bit lower fuel prices, down about 26%. As well as lower feed costs as well for livestock producers.
And crop producers might likely get some payments from the new Farm Bill programs, with USDA forecasting those payments to be up 15% from last year. But remember, as USDA grains analyst Jerry Norton told the Forum,
at this point, we don't even know what farmers have signed up for, whether it's PLC or ARC.
So any forecast for how much the government farm program payments might contribute to farm income are highly tentative. But analysts say, of course, those payments would not bring total farm income up anywhere near the levels of recent years. And USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson was very frank.
Producers faced with high cash rents and falling commodity prices will find it hard to cover operating costs in some regions.
So some belt tightening likely over this next year or two. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Right now, less than half the farmers who could come into their local FSA office to reallocate base acres and update yield histories have done so. The deadline for that was set for this Friday. Only about 26% of the farmers who need to make the election between the two major risk management programs before the March 30th deadline have done so.
I'm like a lot of farmers. I think I'm a procrastinator. We still have a little time.
Kansas farmer Rich Feltz giving the Senate Ag Committee his reason for not making that farm program choice yet. The concern is the local Farm Service Agency offices won't be able to handle the last-minute rush of farmers trying to make the deadline. So will USDA consider extending the deadlines?
As we have been flexible in the past, we will be flexible in the future.
But that's about as far as Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack would go. He told the panel there's a registry system set up now
for folks to sign up to be able to meet technically the deadline without the T's crossed and the I's being fully dotted.
He said he's getting daily reports on sign-up progress, and as far as deadline extensions,
I don't want to commit to that today.
But he didn't rule it out either. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Slow cookers are a great way to get a meal going without having to constantly keep an eye on it. But, as Gary Crawford with the U.S. Department of Agriculture explains, there are some safety hazards and health concerns that we need to take into account.
While it seems many of us run on fast food, there are some who want just the opposite.
I want some slow food.
Slow food.
Crock pots are for fast French fries. Crock pots are for feet. Give me that slow food.
He uses the phrase crock pot, which really is a brand name, sort of like we used to say, Xerox me a copy of that or give me some Kleenex.
So the proper terminology is really a slow cooker.
Slow cooker, yes, slow food. That's Ohio State University Extension food safety educator Lynette Gord. She says when we use the oven or the stove, we use a high temperature at a pretty fast cooking time to get the food done and kill any bacteria that might be in it. With a slow cooker, we're using much lower temperatures but a longer, slow cooking time.
And so it uses the length of the cooking time as well as steam to help destroy bacteria that might be in the food.
Now, Lynette says one of the big mistakes that we slow cookers make is to put huge, thick chunks of meat in there with the other stuff. If the meat takes up almost the whole pot, there's not enough steam to get that meat up to at least 140, 160 degrees in the center. And even with the steam, it may leave the meat at a temperature less than 140 for too long, and 2 hours is too long. And that actually promotes the growth of bacteria in there, especially if you start with frozen food items. So there are a couple of ways around this problem. One, very obvious.
Not to put frozen food in, because frozen food cannot possibly get from 0 degrees to 140 degrees within 2 hours. The second thing is to cut your meat into smaller pieces.
But if you insist on putting in that big roast or whatever and not cutting it up,
heat it up. Put it on the stovetop. Make sure that it's hot before you put it into the slow cooker. And that just kind of gives it a jump start to getting up to that temperature we wanted.
And another good idea, if you're going to be around for a while, as you start the slow cooker,
Put it on high at least for the first hour.
also don't flip your lid a lot. Lynette says every time you take that lid off, the steam gets out of there and the temperature goes down and takes a bit to recover. So leave it on as much as possible. But even then, none of this is a guarantee of getting that meat or poultry done into a high enough temperature to kill bacteria. Lynette says we all need to have and use a meat thermometer, especially with slow cookers, to make sure the internal temperature of that meat gets high enough.
Poultry products should be cooked to 165. Ground meats should be up to 160. Your roast can be cooked to 145.
So follow Lynette's advice and we can hurry up and enjoy that without having to worry about getting sick from it later on. This is Gary Crawford. I talk fast, but I eat slow. Reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington. The Farm Bill opens up the possibility of the Agriculture Department creating a new undersecretary position just dealing with foreign issues and trade. Currently, there's one undersecretary handling both domestic and foreign trade issues. The Farm Bill requires the USDA to do a study on just how this reorganization would work, and Congress has added $600,000 to pay for a private group to do that study. This week, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack told the Senate Ag Committee USDA is in the final stages of hiring that private firm,
who will look at precisely how it could be done, how many various agencies and mission areas within USDA will be engaged in this, because it's not just Foreign Ag Service, it's APHIS, it's a variety of other departments within the USDA, and then come up with a set of recommendations as to how we would best implement.
Vilsack could not give a timeline for when the study would be done and a new trade position established.
But I can tell you that we are making progress in getting this thing through the process, and we understand the importance of it.
With trade accounting for an ever-growing percentage of U.S. farm income. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.